Hi. So this is about existentialism in the sense of self, self and other, where we might see this coming up. And where I find that a lot of existential um, treasure, if you will, can be found is in relationship, where on one level, there's this idea of the merging of two that become one. And what does that really mean? Two and then the one. And then the questions that arise of how do we stay two as one? And some of the fallacies of what one is from a perspective, a mental perspective, or an emotional perspective, or an embodied perspective that's taking into consideration the totality of all of the faculties that we have. So, our own unified field of oneness and what that's meaning. And so, there feels like there's some really good treasures already in potential waiting for us to discover here together. But the first thing that I wanted to start with is often our, if we want to say wound, or our first experiencing of this existential crises within us of the who am I, can happen when we're really young and pre-verbal. And I personally have this experience of being really small diapers and having this feeling of I'm crying, and in the crying there's nobody around. So who can hold me and who is there? And I feel a lot of people have this experience when they start coming up against the one that is in form, the representation, symbolic representation of who is supposed to be the caregiver, right? Who is teaching us our nervous system love and how to feel love and loving. And then what our actual experience is, where that coherency is broken. The one that's supposed to be giving us what it is that we need, that in natural organic situations happens. We could call it healthy. I'm just going to call it in natural or normal circumstances, because I think the dishealth part is normalizing things that are not healthy and calling it normal. And although dishealth might be becoming more normalized, it's really good to look at what our nature is, that following what is aligned with the truth of us is what is normal. That being said, we can observe this, that when somebody is hurting, that our natural impulse is to go to that person or to resolve it, to see that there's a problem and to want to fix it. So we can touch on both the masculine and the feminine essential archetypal responses, but there's still an action. The point is that there's still the desire to be in service to the one that is in the moment in need. So as a child, we often don't have these faculties of one, being able to separate the I and this need that we're having, that is, just as simple as I feel lonely, I want to be held, I need that, and how much our bodies, our nervous system actually need the holding, right? So There's the child that's needing. There's the lack of availability for those needs to be met. It's as simple as that. And the need's still there. So how does the self soothe itself when it doesn't even know what else is available? It can in that moment feel like a void, an abyss. It can also feel like, in a way, it can feel like a sensation of a prison, of not being able to move outside of oneself. It can feel like, if you have ever seen a child crying where they stop moving and they're just crying, and it's almost like they're standing and their heads are turned upwards and they're just crying, they're standing still. It's like that. It's like I'm hurting. Where do I go? There's nobody there. I don't know where to go. So I don't know where to move my body to get that need met. And so I just stand here and I'm alone and I'm hurting and there's nobody there. And the longer that we have these experiences, the more that this paradigm, we're more that we're left to soothe ourselves with no one or nothing there, the more that these existential programs are kind of burned into our system. So when we take that existential, who gives me love, who gives me support, the who am I, and why is there not love here present, which of course is different. It would be a different experience if every time we were crying or as we were young, right? And the attunement of the parent to the child, recognizing, oh, this is a moment where they're needing, right? Or this is a moment where they got it. That attunement from the parent is different than the isolation that happens when there's no choice that a child has, because there really is no other energy that is available to it to help it move or shift from one feeling to another feeling, to even know that that's a possibility. So then when we take that and we get into relationship on a very subtle level, this idea of merging ourselves with another person, when we've spent the majority of our lives either building up a sense of I personhood, I personality, there can be these unconscious fears, and they can be really, really, really deep that we don't recognize them in a conscious way, how they're subtly operating in ways that are keeping another out, right? And why keeping another out is not in service to love is because every facet that's not a part of us is apart from us. So the separation creates and perpetuates more and more feelings of isolation, loneliness, different from being alone, right? Because in aloneness, we can be alone with lots of different things, lots of different frequencies and energies that are really sustaining and fulfilling. Loneliness, though, is the longing for these things. So there's a feeling of lack within the loneliness that is wanting to pull like a magnet them to us, different from alone. So in relationship, then, this having an other in togetherness, we learn through conditions unconditionality. We we learn how to surrender. And the surrendering of self actually creates closeness. I want to make a distinction here, though, between surrender and sacrifice. Sacrifice, in the common way that we often utilize sacrifice, it's like giving up that thing for the other. And then often there's a condition or a hook to it where the other's supposed to recognize what we gave up. And so there's some sort of waiting, like I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Like, sacrifice really is when we love someone or something, it's easy to give that thing up, right? It actually, the sacrifice is only a word that we utilize to point to the thing, which is really in love, where we give up the thing that's keeping us from being together. So it really then, on that level, isn't a sacrifice. We're not really sacrificing anything, because when we love, it's like, oh, what I value more is the essential truth, not the thing or the object that's keeping me from the closeness with you, right? That's that thing I can give up. That becomes a sacrifice to the altar of closeness or relationship, or to God, to love, in which love can love that, right? And us being able to give or gift this then frees us from that thing in which love can now enter. More love can enter because we've given up an object, we've sacrificed that thing, and we've become more spacious. When we're more spacious, there's less mind, there's less thought, there's less confusion filling up the space. We become more empty, but in the emptiness, there's more fullness. This is the paradox. In relationship, this is happening when we see what the things are that we as a person, I, Courtney, I'm holding this thing. And that thing becomes more important to me than us being close. So when we think about in most religions or most spiritual paths, there are the things to avoid, right? The things that by avoiding these, you've got these things that happen. Or we could say by focusing on these things, you can easily abstain or see clearly these things over here that are like roadblocks in the path that keep you from being here in eternity to being over here in time and separated from eternity, and then the bridge between the two in this kind of playground that we play in as we learn and we stabilize ourselves more in eternity. So all these things over here that we're in relationship with, that's not already in eternity, in love, in wholeness, are the sacrifices that we make to be here, to be here now in presence, because each one of these things becomes a crux or a holding pattern that keeps us from love, from eternity, from being fully present here. And they keep us from the depth of our desire by, in a way, tricking us to believe that these things that are of the world actually have more value to us than these things in eternity. And they can keep people really well satiated. But the thing is that behind all of these things of the world, the hunger or the longing of communion or togetherness, where there's never separation, where there's always we're always in this field together, in resonance, there's no hiding in this. There's no separate sense of I in this. People can spend their whole lifetime in a certain satisfaction that doesn't actually touch the peace that this eternity gives us. And so the roller coaster arises in feeding this over feeding this. So in relationship, when we withhold ourselves from the other, these subtle fears can get in the way that we might not even see are part of what we're relating with, but from an unconscious perspective of relationship. So I'm taking this from the existential point of view of I exist and I don't exist. And so we already talked about where some of these patternings of the existence can hide, where they may have started. They could even, of course, be within the womb as well. We could go further, but I try and keep this as simple as possible. When we have this existential wound of I, then it also has the existential shadow as well. So there's the I exist and the I don't exist. And depending in which of these worlds, in a way, if you want to call this the kingdom of heaven and the world, if just to keep it simple, in these heavenly realms, the I and the way that we understand I existing doesn't exist in the same way. And we can't understand it from the world unless we're in heaven to get the codes for that in the world so that we can understand it in the world. This would be then the unification of the two. As long as there's separation and we pendulate between being in the heaven and being in the world, being in the heaven, then we have one foot in heaven and one foot in the world. Now, that also in itself is unification. When both heaven and the world are whole, when heaven is actually in the world, and we've surrendered the world into heaven. So either way, if we want to look at one as a path, either path will lead you to wholeness, right? It's the lack of movement, which is where existence is, that starts to become where our relationship can get held. So in existence, the I is the most important thing to all of the world. If Courtney doesn't exist, if you watching this, if you don't exist, there's no you that's interpreting what I say. There's no value. There's nothing that when you go out into the world, what you're contributing to, all of the experiences that you have, that you see, that you within yourself, in the alchemical process of your heart, your mind, how you come to understand how this world is, how it operates, how the value and the importance of you showing up and contributing your presence to this world. Without you existing, this world has no value at all. So on the level of the I existing, it's important for all of heaven to be operating. You have to be here. For you to know love in a body, in an experiencing, to have these experiences, this body has to exist with your consciousness in it and it operating in all of the magical ways that it does, magical, mysterious ways that it does, for any of this world to have any relevance. Otherwise, what's the difference between being here or being in an insect, or being in a different planet, or being a cloud, or being, what is that? Now, when we take that question and then move that into differentiation of the I that exists here, Then we start to look at, who am I really in truth? The I that I think and the I that I am. The I that I am has a lot more to it than the I that thinks. And the I that thinks has a consciousness to it that can become aware, but it can't become aware of what it is not until it becomes aware. So there is an existence that's reduced, that is different from the existence that has always been, that is always in potential, waiting to be discovered, and also was always actualized. And we won't know it until we have the direct experience with it. So the I that exists in the who am I has not the existence that we think it does. It has a different existence when we're looking at it or experiencing it from outside or within the form, because it no longer can be defined by consciousness, because it's unconscious to itself before it becomes conscious. So it's in a dream, in a way, until it becomes into existence to be known. So the relationship that we have then to heaven or to kingdom can only be known then by our lived experiences and by contemplation of the who that I am, that is feeling these feelings, that are thinking these thoughts, that the what and who I am that's having this experience. Now, why this is important in relationship is in existential relationship of giving ourselves truly to another, is that there's no longer a self that's in the way. Our self becomes the sacrifice to another. And the self that I'm talking about is the self that wants to get in the way of being. So the self, I'm going to keep defining this. The self that we habitually think of ourselves as, and all the things that we've learned about ourselves, and all the ways that I say I'm a female, thus the roles and paradigms that a female must operate in or is liberated from, both of those become forces within our psyche that we now have choices. And the more information that we accumulate becomes more choices within a field of consciousness that we can choose from. And yet, as we've already talked about, this beyondness, this mystery that's beyond form identification of what's already known, because we've had some experience with it. This over here in the kingdom is still true. And we notice that when we become aware of something that was unknown to us before, it changes and shifts it can change and shift our whole paradigm. So we become something different based on what was not known that becomes known, that we then identify with. We go, oh yeah, I didn't see that in myself, but now I do. And when we change and shift, and now we identify, which means I, Courtney, now say, oh, that's now who I am. I've taken that information and I've now made it a part of myself. I am that. The more things that I add to myself in understanding of myself, thinking that's who I am, at the end, when we're talking about being in relationship, it's that exact thing that we end up surrendering back out and saying, I'm not that. I'm not letting that thing that I think I am get in the way of love, because I don't know who I am. I see that who I am and what I think I am are in conflict with each other. That every time I think and I make that thought me, it reorients me. And if I have wrong thinking and I've continued to think in wrong ways, those distortions become my suffering. And the more distortions based on faulty thinking that I've accumulated, I become more distorted. I suffer more. And I might need more of the world and all of the things to satiate the longing for the truth of stopping accumulating things that I think, so that I can rest and relax in being, which means to actually stop what the world tells us to keep doing, which is adding to ourselves more knowledge. It's to actually, in a way, die, surrender all of this that I think, to look to the unknown, to then see the relationship between the unknown and the known, and the dynamics that happen in relationship to me in existence, and what I will need to surrender then for love, which we call that a sacrifice. But really, when we feel the desire to be in union, always permanently with another, we want to give that up. In purity, we want to get that thing out of our heart. This is why things like we confess, because we want to take that stone out of our heart, and we want to feel that purity again. We want to feel the wholeness. This is if we're in contact with that within us that calls us back to ourselves. When we have too much of the world, that voice that for some people is really loud becomes a very still, small voice within us. Maybe even occluded. Maybe even we've created a different relationship because the world and the gravity of the world and the instant gratification now, and there's so many of them that can happen as a result of relating with things of the world, which include ways to fill our time, of doing. And so the doing becomes the master versus the being, the listening, the waiting to respond, and the fullness of that. And again, there's nothing wrong. I really want to hit that foundation. There's nothing wrong with any of this, because when we look at how we're created and the self that's discovering itself, this is all very natural. It's all very normal. It's all very, very much how we seem to be discovering ourselves, are through all of these different contrasts. Yet the longing for completion and the completion itself, the desire for creation and the birthing of that versus the full gestation, the always pregnant and always in fullness, completion, already birthed into itself, and yet this birth that's awaiting to come into form, made manifest, they're both always operating simultaneously. So there's not an either or here, it's a both and. It's moving out and understanding where we're stuck in, I'll call it polarity, but when we're stuck in different mindsets that pull us into worlds where we have to make these choices that create confusion in our energy, that ultimately create suffering for us. And so in this existentialism of the I that wants relationship and wants this togetherness, it's looking at the fear within us that's keeping us separate from the other. It's getting honest with what we're withholding from the other, who from another level of mind is us, and all the different ways that we are creating and reinforcing the illusion and separation that they're someone different from us. And fundamentally, that idea that they're different from us is what is perpetuating all of the fear. So we can either look at the fear, they're other, and I'm afraid of myself as another. I'm afraid of looking at myself and owning all of the things about myself that this other is showing me, that really I have made them the carrier for, and now I'm having to love myself in those, which is true. Like all of that is true. So you can look at it that way. You know, what is the others is the others. What is ours is ours. And so we could try and give them to another, and maybe we might be really good at manipulating other. And this, for me, is where all of our fragmentation comes from, is through that perceptual manipulation, and that we've pulled people into and made them responsible for things that aren't their responsibility. And so we have to pull back our responsibility and own our creation and be true, pure manifestors of heavenly creation, and understand the difference of what we can create when we're not emotionally regulated and not in divine emotions, and understand that there are differences, and these polarities that are generated on levels of being are asked to find relationship again in communion. And it's looking at in truth of ourselves, in the purity of ourselves, that, and saying, I am responsible for what I'm creating. So now I want relationship, right? Now, yes, I'm making a gross assumption that the reason we're in relationship is love. Some people, yes, might be stuck in neediness, and the reason why they're in relationship are to get their own selfish needs met. That's not what I'm talking to. I'm speaking to completion, and how relationship then can be utilized as a tool. And also, love is loving itself whole. And with two people doing that, seeing love in the outside and seeing love on the inside, two people doing that work, and then being transparent, bringing to the altar of the other fears and insecurities. And maybe it's not other, but if you can tell God something that you can't tell the other something, that's something to look at. If you say, I love you, but I'm afraid of you, that's something to look at. And this is what I'm pointing to, because until that full merging happens, until I'm not afraid to tell you anything, because I'm not hiding anything from myself, and I'm responsible for everything that I'm doing, which means that if that means that I'm going to be alone because you can't be with me with this, I'm going to let you do that, right? If that's what I'm feeling like is aligned with the truth of myself, I'm going to let the world do what it needs to do while I stand in fidelity to the truth of the totality of myself. But I'm offering it to you. And then I'm offering it in the process, all of the different ways that I see in the moment that I'm not in alignment with the truth of myself, that's getting in the way of love between us, between me and my relationship with God, between me and my relationship with another, between me and my relationship with myself, as all of that, right? So this existential reality of I exist is so important, because without claiming the I of the existence, none of this is possible. God has nowhere to land if I have no form. Also, if I'm not willing to surrender my form to God, God has no space to be. And herein lies the dance. So some of the fears that might arise in relationship, these subtle fears, is if we have lived this existential longing to be held, and that there's nobody coming back and becoming that, we might have created patternings then where there's fear of, if I let you in, if I really give you the space to exist, I might not have anything. I might not exist. And if we have, in past versions of ourselves, if we have this patterning of letting people in, and they get to take up more space in us, we might be questioning, who am I? Right? So this fear is real. To be here, I must let go of the I that I am, which leads to this ungrounded feeling, well, who am I? I wrote some little notes over here that I'm kind of checking in on, because I see that now I've kind of gone off over here, and now I'm wanting to come back over here. So what I see is that there's this fear of power, of annihilation. If I let you in, where's my place in my space? I will no longer exist. I, as Courtney, won't exist. That's the fear. That I stop existing if I let you in. And so there's this game then of objectifying everything, our existence, so that we can have and stay and maintain the power of choice to let someone in or not. So in a way, we can learn all of these tools and techniques, but they're all defensive mechanisms for this one key subtle thing, which is fear of annihilation, of the I who exists in love. And do we really think that love would do that? Annihilation, for some people who may have lived this on a lot of different levels, may feel like change. And so this fear of change becomes really present and prominent, which means I can't let you in because I don't want to change, because of my fear that letting you in and changing, I won't know who I am. So that annihilation of the who I believe myself to be, I'm afraid of. And so this is a threat to me and to my separate sense of self. And yet it's exactly this that love is calling to. It's the paradox. Because love is calling to this depth that says all that is not aligned in love must fall, it must crumble. And the question is, to that little one who has felt that pain, and there was nobody there to pick him or her up, will love be here when I fall, when there's nothing? Love wasn't there then. Will love be there now? I don't know, and I don't know if I can trust that. And so I protect myself. And yet it's the protection of this self, this separate identity, this form, that's keeping real, true fulfillment out. What would love do if we were to sit with that small child right now, that one who was crying and there was nobody around, as if that the crying didn't matter, the reason why the child was you were crying didn't matter. There was no support outside of you, and there was nowhere to go. And there's you just spinning around in yourself, reaching out to something that would hold you, that became your God outside of yourself, something outside of you that could hold you. Not until that thing outside of you is satiated. Why don't we acknowledge that now and hold that one there? Pick him or her up and hold them and say, I'm here. I've got you. I love you. Gosh, I love you so much. I see you. I'm right here with you. I'm not letting you go. I am not. And now tuck that one with you in your heart. Tell them that you're carrying them with you wherever you go, and that you've got them. Love has got you. Love has got you there. If everything crumbles apart, you've got you. You love yourself. That love has got you because you know how to love yourself here. You exist, you see that. And when you see now that invincibility, that there's nothing that actually can annihilate you. Because love will always love. You don't need to test it, because when you have picked yourself up from there, when you have loved yourself in that existence, in that hurt and that pain, and you have faced that within yourself, what could another person do to you that would feel as isolating as that you have allowed in yourself for so long? There isn't. And this power that we keep from each other, this power over vulnerability, over openness, over surrender, over letting people in, to control from fear of self-annihilation, small self-annihilation, small self that has built its life on faulty understanding, that is always protecting itself from its own annihilation, which actually is parasitic in nature when we really get down to it. It's not generating life, it's only protecting its own life. That which gives life comes from the heavenly realms, that would show us that by letting go, by sacrificing for love, that which is lesser, we would receive more. We would be given this and more. We still maintain our separate sense of identity. I am Courtney, and I'm operating, and I've got this unique way of seeing the world, and I speak in this way, and I do these. These are characteristics to how I show up. But the I that operates and generates all of this is way greater than what comes through the this that you are relating with, which is the same for you in your uniqueness, in your sovereign individuality, which is still unified in the same truth that I'm unified in. And when we start relationship in this understanding, holding each other here, purifying ourselves from ourselves, putting at the feet of our beloved, more and more beloved, more and more of our fear, of our shame, and just calling it out, but not identifying with it. I feel, watch when we vulnerably express with self-owning, self-accounting, the I that feels, without trying to manipulate other people into our story. We're just in our own experiencing of our experiencing. We let people into that. Watch what's actually happening. What actually happens, we'll find, is love comes in. Love comes in and loves us in those places, and those places surrender themselves to love. It's like, ooh, wow, you're gonna love me? You're actually gonna love me here? Wow, and that compassionate way of relating, you're actually gonna hold me here where I'm feeling small? And you're gonna honor me by being with me and loving me here, and seeing that I actually can love myself here too. And oh, I can love myself here. Oh, I just love myself here. Oh, look at this, I feel whole again, and I surrender the story. It's like magic when we see the patterning. That love loves itself whole. Love loves itself. Being with is when we become that. In a way, to use words, it polarizes. It becomes a neutral space. It just is. And then what is outside, what is seemingly separate, can see itself. And in seeing itself, it can know itself and love itself back whole again. But it's not feeding a story. It's not making it wrong. It's just allowing and relating with it in its story while we are in a space of whatever that is, neutrality, and there's love that's just permeating all of that. Understanding, truth, compassion, all the virtues. When we're not aware of this wound of existence, we also have a shadow where we create then this unequal field of power where we're protecting, and then we utilize all these words of identification so that we can protect ourselves more from the simplicity of ourselves. When we're living within the kingdom, there's no protection, because what we see outside of ourselves is all us. There's no form identity. And the form identity has no value other than what the value is in the idea or thought that it's given, but it's no more differentiated value than anything else. In love, it's all love and lovable. So power and control only become tools of this world, where we utilize it to manipulate and separate. Because when we surrender that power, that force, and we're given it, and it's a temptation, and when we don't see how it's so common, it's easy to get caught up in it because we don't see. So how could we? But we are given power to withhold and create stories as much as we're given power to give it back. I give this force back to you. I give this power back to you, God. I surrender this to you. I surrender this power to you. I surrender this force to you. I see where it wants to take me. I'm with you. You get the temptation. You see what it wants, how it wants to use you to keep you separate. When you see the temptations of the world, and you see that, and you recognize the temptation of it, you can use it in a different way. And maybe you just might surrender it all. Have no attachment to any of the world, including your relationship, where when there's no need, attachment meaning a clinging to the other being something that you want or you need. that want and need for them to be something other than the who or what they say they are in truth. And you just operate from your own sense of autonomy. And your own connection to the divine. You're developing that relationship. That relationship will influence this relationship. Yet, when you're only choosing to stay in connection and communion, what you see outside of yourself can be nothing less than what you've chosen to surrender in love. So power and control keeps us from vulnerability. And it's the vulnerability that's the true power, because when we're transparent to ourselves, that's where God is. God can easily change and shift worlds when we're transparent with what we ourselves want and what we need, and we offer the truth so that something else, something greater can come in to that and imbue it with love so that we can love it. I exist and I don't exist simultaneously. If either of those are out of balance, we'll be pulled back into games of power and control and vulnerability, and the pendulum swings. Who has the power? Who has? Thank you so much for being with me.